Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all participants who joined today's webinar. Before we start, we will take a short picture from all participants. Anna, could you be so kind to take a picture from us? Please switch on your camera and smile if possible.
Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon to everyone who is joining us today, wherever you are right now. So I'm Anna, and I'm here with my colleague Vivian to provide support for today. And we welcome you to our session for today, which is stimulating the private sector investment in resilient infrastructure. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Mario Unterweinig. He's the Disaster Risk Management Specialist in the Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Division and the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of the Asian Development Bank.
Thank you, Anna. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants. I hope you are all safe and feeling well in these very challenging times. You see it maybe on my headphones and my mic. I'm your today's chief pilot who will guide you safely through this brown bag session. Today's event is part of SDCC's Resilience Learning Week, addressing the topic stimulating private sector investments in resilient infrastructure. Developing Asia will need to invest $1.7 trillion per year in infrastructure until 2030 to maintain its growth momentum, tackle poverty, and respond to climate change. Natural hazards and climate change have a huge impact on infrastructure, and governments alone cannot ensure infrastructure systems are adequately resilient to cope with climate change and natural hazards. This Zoom event explores how private sector engagement can be stimulated to enhance investment in climate and disaster resilient infrastructure. So let's have a quick look at today's agenda. Anna, can you share the slide, please? Thank you. At first, we will have a short introduction, then we will have the panel discussion where your questions from the registration will be answered, hopefully splitting into the groups and discussion of the topics, findings, and the closing remarks. We have achieved to attract three very competent speakers for this topic. Anna, can you share, please, slide 3 with us? It will be Elizabeth Peteo. She's in the Asia Pacific Regional Representative based in Bangkok for Miyamoto International, where she plays a key leadership role in the development in the region. Mrs. Peteo has over 15 years of experience in a range of international disaster resiliency programming work all over the world, including disaster response, urban disaster risk reduction, and risk management. Thanks for joining us and very warm welcome. The second panelist will be Elisa McLennan. She is consulting professional at Arup with over Can you hear me? Because I was lost.
It cut out, I think, just after you said my name.
Okay, sorry for that. Elisa McLennan is a consulting professional at Arup with over 15 years of experience in the development of feasibility study and business case across social and economic infrastructure projects. Elisa has a broad experience across the transport, tourism, sustainability, and resilience sectors, and is passionate about ensuring government investment decisions consider the value of wider social, economic, and environmental benefits. Very warm welcome also to you, Elisa. And the third panelist will be Mr. Sanjay Grover from ADB. Sanjay brings over 18 years of extensive PPP policy and transaction experience, both from a grantor and also from a sponsor's perspective. At the PPP Thematic Group Secretariat, Sanjay is leading the Creating Investable Cities initiative to help cities in Asia Pacific find the most efficient financing for the most effective infrastructure to build back better from the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to joining ADB in the Office of Public-Private Partnership, Sanjay worked as a consultant for the PPP Group and the Competitive Cities Knowledge Base of the World Bank. Sanjay, thanks for joining us today. You see, the panel is highly qualified to answer your questions and also leading the audience through the group discussion. Please advise which group you want to join. We are trying that each of the three groups has the same size of participants. Anna, could you share slide 4 with us, please? Thank you. Group 1, led by Elisabeth, will be discussing the issue of resilient infrastructure in Asia and Pacific. Group 2, led by Sanjay, will talk about enabling private sector investments in resilient infrastructure in Asia. And Group 3 from Elisa will talk about the role of PPP as a driver of critical infra resilience and industry perspective. Anna, could you please explain how to join the groups? Anna will also tell you in the chat box again how to join the different groups. So please, Anna,
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mario. So as you can see in the slide shared before you, these are the instructions for renaming yourself. So the previous slide showed you the 3 groups which you can join. So if you can look at your Zoom controls, you see the participants button at the bottom of your Zoom window. And if you click that button, you'll see the participants window pop up. And you will see your name, and you can click more next to your name, and you can rename yourself. So to choose the group that you want to join, just add the number of the breakout group or the topic that you want to join before your name. So don't erase your name, just add, for example, 1-Anna Reyes. That would be my group then. So if you prefer to join 2, then just add 2- then your name, or 3- your name. So if you have other questions about this, we're happy to assist you in the chat, and we'll be sending the instructions as well in the chat. I will hand it over back to Mario now.
Thank you, Anna, for this explanation. So let's jump into this very interesting and also more and more current topic and start first with the panel discussion. We have about 15 minutes time for answering questions which you selected during your registration process. We have chosen the highest ranked questions, but also those which you sent us in addition. So the first question will be for Elisabeth. Elisabeth, delivering resilient infrastructure is about more than just the physical structure. It's also policy work. How can we best implement this broader policy work, and how does this been of particular interest of government and also private partners? So over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join this really critical discussion. So allow me just to frame the importance of what we're talking about here. According to World Bank estimations, in low and middle income countries, direct damages from natural hazards to power generation and transport alone cost $18 billion a year. And this cuts already into very tight budgets. But beyond this, the main impact of natural shocks on infrastructure is through the disruptions that they impose on people and communities. So households unable to access water and power, businesses unable to keep factories running, the ability of people to get to hospitals, for example. So this already brings a really key point, which is resilient infrastructure is not just about bridges, roads, or power plants only. It's about the households and the communities for whom quality infrastructure is the link to better livelihoods, education, and health. So investment in this space is really about creating safer and more inclusive and more prosperous futures. As you know, in this region, we face complex disaster risks. Of the more than 68 million people affected by disasters in Asia Pacific in 2019, the majority were caused by weather-related hazards. So for those who are not aware, Miyamoto International is a structural and earthquake engineering firm, but we also work on multi-hazard risk and disaster risk reduction. And we work all along the disaster management cycle, from actual crisis management after the disaster, supporting the rapid damage assessments, the response and recovery, all the way up through the risk management side and early warning and preparedness. We are based in the US. We have over 20 offices worldwide. We've been working in this region for more than 15 years. And as Mario mentioned, I'm based in Bangkok. So there are 4 really key points that I would like to make. The first is foundational to resilient infrastructure is the governance and management of infrastructure systems. So if systems are very poorly maintained, they cannot be resilient. And this points to a lot of the interventions that are needed on the upstream preparedness side, including those that support quick recovery, but also the broader social and community level resilience initiatives. And the second point that I want to make is around institutional resilience. So looking at the various regulations and incentives that are in place, or gaps around that, looking at codes and standards and design. Also understanding the institutional landscape in regards to incorporating and making decisions based on risk information and the implementation of those regulations. The third is really around decision-making, improving and strengthening decision-making with regards to understanding risks and access to better data, tools, and skills. So this can look at risk identification and estimation, including the role of technology, which can be used upstream to help gather that risk data on hazard exposure and vulnerability, but also downstream to assess, analyze, decide, and expedite recovery after damages. The fourth point is on the financing side. One of the critical things to remember, to consider in natural risks in the early stages of infrastructure design is that investment upfront. So the amount of resources put upstream looking at life cycle costs and resilient design are less than the billions spent to repair and recover in the aftermath of a disaster. So to summarize those 4 key points: systems, institutions, decision-making, and design as a key part of the upstream financing. Now, finally, I just want to say a couple of points about operationalizing this, since I know this is part of ADB's Learning Week. And so how do you really put this into practice? What would that look like? So to support the policy analysis, let's take example of power infrastructure. You know, you would look at mapping the existing system in detail, assessing and analyzing the steps that have already been taken, policy and others, to build resilience and incorporate best practice and identify any gaps. You would undertake the cost benefit analysis of investing in resilience by adopting a life cycle approach, and then make recommendations for a roadmap for improvements to the system to build resilience based on the impact of future hazards. Then you would look at the various financing instruments and options for investing in resilience, and then looking at disseminating those findings to national actors as a part of building awareness and support for the effort. So that's looking at sort of one asset as an example, or power infrastructure as an example. On the management and governance side then, what you really want to look at is, again, the process mapping of the institutional landscape, looking at the nitty-gritty, you know, the responsibilities, the reporting mechanisms, the compliance obligations, the funding mechanisms, understanding how risk data has been incorporated or has not in the governance, decision-making, and regulation work. You want to map the policy landscape, review the policies and recommendations that relate to risk reduction, the laws, the regulations, the guidelines, the institutional frameworks of preparedness, as well as response and recovery. You want to look at the process review. How regularly are assets, inventories updated and maintained? You want to look at coordination. What are the mechanisms for coordination and cooperation between stakeholders like utilities, government institutions, and municipalities? And then again, you want to think about that roadmap for improving the process and the policy based on the gaps and the dissemination of the findings, again, to build awareness. So in terms of the final remarks here, the summary is that resilient infrastructure fundamentally is about people. And to understand this broader agenda, you have to understand the policies and the governance frameworks, looking at the systems, the institutions, the decision-making processes, the upstream design work. And then operationally, you also have to think about that process and policy piece before you even get to the hardware part of the discussion. So those are my final opening remarks, and back over to you, Mario. Thank you.
Many thanks, Elizabeth, for answering and raising, in your opinion, the foremost important points like governance and maintenance. Thank you again. The second question for Elisa will be, why should the private sector invest in resilient infrastructure, even in difficult times like this? Elisa, please give us your view on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario, and it's nice to be joining everyone. So hello from around the world. I'm based in Melbourne, so I found this a really interesting question, reflecting on some work that we did, which was going out to industry and investors and developers and understanding what their drivers were. And so I'm going to reflect on that, but we did that a year ago, which was before the Black Summer bushfires here in Australia. And the responses that we received then, I think, are very different to what we would receive now, after a lot of those investors and developers have actually experienced extreme weather events firsthand in Australia. So I guess going back to why should they invest, there were two schools of thought, and one of those was when we were speaking with industry that were on the social infrastructure side, so not looking to make a huge return around hospitals, around education. I think there's a bit of background noise. Okay. Is that just me?
Somebody's please switch on your mics. So I think it's done already. Sorry for that.
Not a problem.
He just wants to say hello to you.
Definitely. So I think there was a very different angle from the social infrastructure and why they should invest versus economic infrastructure. And we spoke to a toll road operator and their incentives were very different. So if I pick up on the second one, the toll road operator, it was very much around financial incentives, and they at the time didn't look at it as resilience, but they would build roads essentially to lower their risk profile so that their insurance premiums were lower and so that they could reduce their whole of life costs. So things like building their roads better to withstand extreme heats and floods, those kind of aspects were very much from the bottom line, rather than when we said to them, is your asset resilient? They were like, oh, what do you mean? Whereas from the social infrastructure side, that was really embedded from the start, that they were starting with the people and what could they do. So we spoke to a hospital that that was very, they thought about the people and thought, okay, well, if we have an overflow, if this was a hospital in a regional area, if we had a bushfire, then we need to be that centre for them. So they had fitted out an additional floor, even though they didn't need it for that capacity. So I guess there's two answers. If you're looking at it from the bottom line, you know, the private sector should be investing so that they can reduce their risk and reduce their insurance premium and improve their bottom line. But if you're looking at it from the social perspective and the hospital side, it's really more about the people while still being efficient.
Okay, thank you, Elisa, for your questions, answering the questions. And the third question for Sanjay will be based on your experience, which has included both advanced economy like the US and also emerging economies in Asia Pacific. Can you give us some good examples of how private sector can invest in resilient infrastructure in just 3 or 5 minutes, if possible? Thank you, Sanjay. So, Sanjay? So I think we lost him. Maybe we can try to reconnect him. Maybe I will in between ask a second question to Elizabeth. What can governments do to improve private sector investments in resilient infrastructure? Just give us a very, very quick answer to this question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, I think it pulls back to some of the comments that I made earlier in terms of understanding the process and mapping the system and understanding where the gaps are vis-a-vis their own structures, but also international best practice. We know that this kind of, there's a lot of access to risk data that's available, but how that is mainstreamed in decisions and how that is part of creating regulations, such as if you're looking at building codes, for example, how has that been considered and updated? So these are this kind of upstream policy analysis, whether it's looking at a specific area of infrastructure like power, transport, or water, or on the broader governance side of how decisions get made, how regulations are formatted and implemented is a really important part of the process. Back over to you, Mario.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I think we lost Sanjay. So maybe Anna, you can try to reconnect him or reach him out.
Yes, we're working on it.
Otherwise, we will split up into.
Sanjay is back.
Sanjay is back. Great. Thank you, Sanjay. Maybe we have just a very short. Sanjay, can you hear me?
Hi there, Mario. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Sanjay, maybe a very quick answer to your question, and sorry for joining us. Based on your experience, which has included both an advanced economy like the US and also emerging economies in Asia, can you give us some good example of how private sector can invest in this resilient infrastructure? Please, in a very quick view, if possible. Thank you, Sanjay.
Sure. I apologize. I was booted out. So apologies if I can't come on video right now. I'm calling from my phone. But thanks for the question, Mario. This is pretty important considering the importance of getting private sector involved into resilient infrastructure. If I was to think, I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in Asia Pacific compared to the US or other advanced economies is data. Let me take an example of housing. Housing is one infrastructure where the governments or the multilateral development banks are not really involved in a very big way. It's usually individuals' equity, levered by commercial financing through commercial banks. And so the investment from the private sector is typically pretty high in this already, but housing is also an area that needs huge improvements in resiliency and energy efficiency. I mean, the benefits of private sector investment in resiliency are apparent. I mean, the World Bank estimates that investment in resiliency in housing will generate somewhere around a 400% return over its lifetime. The Global Center on Adaptation talks about this being somewhere between 200 to 1,000%, depending on the quality of the housing. I worked at Fannie Mae, which is one of the biggest lenders in the US and who financed almost half the mortgages that happen in the US. And I was involved in a very small pilot mezzanine lending program of roughly around $400 million. Basically a program where apartment building owners could borrow more to bring efficiencies to their apartments. This could be a greener roof, more energy efficient windows, low flow taps, just anything to be able to reduce their operating costs. This program, which started off as a $400 million pilot, is now roughly a $75 billion, now backed by almost a $75 billion green bond. And this is not a very innovative product. I mean, everyone knows the benefits of resiliency, I think the challenge is having the data and the systems to be able to capture it, to be able to show the returns so that the private investments will have, the private sector will actually take the risk to invest in something like this. I mean, in the US, every window, every tap, every roofing material that you buy at a Home Depot, I mean, it comes with its energy efficiency and resiliency indicators. There is a whole network of SMEs that support energy ratings of housing, estimating the cost savings that come in so that banks are willing to lend against the savings. Where the private sector can see the risks and see the returns, they are happy to lend against it. And for similar products to succeed here, a few things have to happen. I mean, while we are focused on newer housing in this part of the world and we're building a lot of it, governments have to take a stricter stand on standards for us to be able to understand these indicators. For existing and lower quality homes, the MDBs have a huge role to play here. I mean, in helping develop these standards, these systems, and by using our financing in a much more catalytic manner. So I think that there are terrific opportunities for us in terms of improving resiliency of infrastructure or getting the private sector more involved as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Sanjay, for reconnecting again and answering the question, and also emphasize ADB's role for supporting this very important issue. So now we are at the third part, splitting up into the groups. So Anna, please, can you do that for us, and please to the group leaders, give us after the end your key findings. Thank you.
Okay, you will see a pop-up window and you can follow that group.
Hello there.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Terrific, thanks. Guys, I am having a little bit of difficulty connecting here. And it's, hi there. Guys, thank you so much for joining this group. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, sir.
For some reason, I'm having difficulty hearing.
We can hear you, Sergey.
Terrific, thank you so much. So guys, the whole focus of this group is to try and understand what are the elements that we can use to enable private sector investment in resilient infrastructure. I started off briefly mentioning the issue of data, but it would be terrific to get you guys' thoughts on what other issues do you think you see as we move forward. And I mean, from the names that I look, I think most of us are from ADB here. Kaushal, do you want to start off?
Sir, thank you, sir. I'm a senior project officer in the India Resident Mission, ADB. So you rightly pointed out that most of us may be from ADB. So basically, sir, recently I attended a Confederation of Indian Industries meeting, in which they pointed that they have low faith on the government, and if they bring about like some new investment on this infrastructure and other things, then how they will like ensure that they will have like a profit on those things. So that is the one aspect that they want to like hear from ADB as well, that suppose if ADB help them to invest on those projects to create like resilient infrastructure, maybe to need for a need of like a better livelihood, better living environment in the city. So how they can be part of that? So the problem was that they don't have faith on the government policy, and they still don't know about the risk, what are the risks and how those risks can be mitigated, so that in future if they like come for investment, and if they don't get return, then how they will be compensated. So that was the point, so that I like from the like private sector parties that I hear. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, if you could tell me where are you from again, and who do you work with?
As I work in a India Resident Mission, my position is Senior Project Officer Transport.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Anybody else? Any other concerns or any other thoughts from anybody else to respond to the question just raised?
Sanjay, is Tony here from Arup. I think I'm looking at mainly city planning sort of initiatives for Arup around the Southeast Asia region. And obviously resiliency is a hot topic at the moment, right? What we're finding out is from the private sector side, because a lot of them are large conglomerates and obviously targeting infrastructure development within the region. I think what's holding them back or needing help on is information and data on how they can mitigate risk, and also in terms of asset protection, as especially when climate sort of scenarios changes in the future. So what we're finding is we are helping them quite a bit upstream in terms of both the advisory side in shaping profitable sort of investment for them on the infrastructure side, as well as the technical inputs into it to ensure that their risks are managed. So we do get involved very, very upfront with them in shaping some of these projects, especially the unsolicited sort of proposals going through, including Philippines, Vietnam, etc.
So this is from the private sector side or the public sector side? Which side do you get involved in, Tony?
At the moment, we are seeing a lot of interest on the private sector side in this angle, but we are at the moment, you might know, we are also working with the Philippines government, including the Department of Transport, on their sort of build infrastructure plans for Philippines and helping them prioritize infrastructure build out. But eventually, these plans will flow into the private sector because that's where the money is coming from, right?
Right. Okay. Guys, it's obvious that I'm having a lot of difficulty here. Would someone else want to actually summarize this discussion for the rest of the group later? Any volunteers? Okay, assuming none, then I will go ahead and do this. But going back to the person from the Indian Resident Mission, and I'm so sorry I missed your name. I think Kaushal, Kaushal, thanks. What you pointed out was a pretty big issue in terms of commitment of governments to be able to show that there would be a consistency in policy. going forward, which gives the private sector a lot of comfort in terms of being able to, because these investments are so long term, there has to be a comfort that there won't be changes in laws and policies going forward. And so usually contracts have these elements built in, but this is a huge risk from the private sector side to come into this element. And Tony, what you were pointing out in terms of the data needs, those are pretty substantial challenges in this part of the world. I mean, I don't know what sectors we have people here from, but with COVID-19, we right now are looking at the health sectors, trying to estimate the benefits of investment in health, trying to estimate the benefits of investment in resiliency across a lot of different sectors. And it's very difficult for us to actually capture it, to be able to show the benefits of that to the private sector side. So, I mean, that is an area where I think a lot of work needs to go as we go forward. Any other thoughts from anybody in whatever sector you may be working in?
I think adding to my point as well, what we are seeing is to sort of help the private sector manage the risk when they're investing into infrastructure. We are seeing a lot of the PPP sort of packages coming out, linking obviously with land development, right? And so the intensity of allowable development can change depending on how they're packaging the infrastructure together. But we do see some policy challenges where policies might not exist in terms of, like, if they're developing above a metro station, for example, in terms of air rights and all that, you know, some countries just do not have the policies to deal with it.
Very true. Very true. But these are also huge untapped areas. I mean, the cost of resiliency has to be paid by someone upfront. And where the private sector can see it and capture it, it turns out to be pretty easy. The example that I gave about the housing efficiency improvements in the US that I was involved in, that was pretty easy. Here, we are finding that ADB is much more involved in aspects like street lighting, municipal building efficiencies, and things like that, where the public sector is taking all the risks anyway. And so where they pay the cost. So it's been pretty easy for us to get the private sector more involved in these sectors. The challenge, of course, is to upscale this, we need a lot more data and a lot more areas of comfort for the private sector. I mean, these policy aspects in terms of air rights over municipal resources, whether it be transit stations, wet markets, and all these are huge opportunities. I mean, the cost of land value in this part of the world is significantly more than, it's significant. It's comparable pretty much to the cities of Europe and Asia and the US. I mean, there's no reason why we should not be tapping more of it to help pay for resiliency as we go forward. Anybody else would like to add something to this? Samia, you're in the private sector, you're in PSOD, right?
Yes, that's correct. Hi.
Hi.
I'm in PSOD.
Any thoughts on your end?
I think this discussion is really interesting because when we talk about resilience, and as you rightly mentioned, most of the things that we do in ADB, the government already gives a lot of support. So for me in PSOD, we work in mostly power sector projects, which have PPAs signed with the government. Usually that comes with an implementation agreement, which has a government guarantee. Usually all of the natural resource or even land, and then other key supporting infrastructure like transmission lines. These are provided by the government. And I guess the question is, how long can the government continue to support these sectors? There comes a time eventually when countries become more and more developed, these safety nets provided by the government and the guarantees are slowly taken away. So when we're talking about resilience, are we saying that we still need that kind of support? Or are we talking about how can we transition from that kind of support where it's half or a lot of the risk is taken by the government completely to a model where private sector comes in? So that's something I would like to get everyone's views on.
Hello?
Could you hear me?
So I didn't hear you for a while, but I must have been cut out.
Sorry.
No. It's on my end. I mean, my internet's not working, and I'm stuck on my phone here. But I did hear you to the point on PPAs and how far does the government continue to support this. At some point, they have to wean away. The private sector needs to wean away from this support.
Right. Yeah, and I wanted your views and everyone else's views on that. So what are we talking about when we say resilience?
Absolutely. Anybody else? Any other thoughts on this or anything?
Hi, Sanjay. I've been with the power sector here in the Philippines for 10 years, probably more on environmental and social safeguards. And with the private sector, I've been working with the private sector and now doing XARR for PSOD. I think it's if you are in the private sector here in the Philippines, there is no government guarantee that your infrastructures or even your transmission lines will be provided by the government. As the private sector, as an investor, you are responsible for making sure that those infrastructures are resilient. So in times of typhoon or any calamities, it's the private sector that usually shoulders the cost of recovery. Yeah. So everything, the whole package, if you're going to invest into infrastructure, that should really be resilient if you are in the private sector. And I think while it may be difficult because of the insufficiency of data to prove to private sector, the return on investment, would be significantly higher with resilient infrastructures rather than recovering every time and shouldering all the costs. I think from the point of view that you also have to be aware that safeguards requirements has to be complied with.
Sorry, I didn't get your name.
Socorro.
Socorro, thanks. So if I was to understand right, are you saying that power sector projects here don't have any government guarantees in terms of PPAs or purchase agreements?
In terms of power purchase agreement, yes, but in terms of the infrastructures, in terms of your facilities, I think it was 2 years ago when the Department of Energy wanted to come up with a profile and a resiliency plan amongst the power sector here in the Philippines. But it it did not materialize. We hosted a workshop for the power sectors to prepare a resiliency management plan and submit to DOE. DOE was supposed to, come up with a plan on how the government will be able to support the energy sector when it comes to calamities, otherwise man-made
Disaster.
disasters, which the energy sector will be affected. So I think as the private investor, you should be, the investor in the Philippines should be able to come up with a resilient infrastructure, because there's no such thing, or very limited government
Support from the government.
support, on resiliency. Yeah.
Sure. Anybody else have thoughts on resiliency and government support in other sectors? Okay. I hate these Zoom calls. If you go on mute, it seems like you're basically stuck in a very silent room all by yourself. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can hear you, Sergey.
Guys, don't go on mute. It's okay. Stay there.
Okay. It's just that I have a dog beside me, so that's why I have to go on mute.
No. So I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Samia. And so the challenges may be different in different countries. But most countries offer guarantees for power. Most countries offer guarantees for almost every infrastructure that we build on the public sector side. The challenge is actually for government to just offer only that much support that you can get the private sector in.
Yeah.
It should be no more than what is needed to get the private sector in. And that's the whole bankability challenge that we all have, of making a project bankable, but just without making it ridiculously a giveaway. And the sources of capital for getting resiliency are tremendous. We just discussed land value capture as something that cities have available to themselves. I was working on a project in Indonesia, which was basically a wet market. And wet markets are absolutely in the news right now. It's where COVID-19 is supposed to have started. Wet markets are basically the biggest hotspots in Asia right now, because that's where a lot of the logistics comes together, where people come from the exurbs, bring vegetables in. It's where the house, almost everybody lands up every morning to pick up vegetables in terms of being a transmission space. And the standards of these are not good at all. They're not resilient in any way. And I was working on a project on redeveloping one of these in Indonesia. And it was apparent that the people who were there were so affected by rain that they lost 2 months of their livelihood every year. And they were more than willing to pay more to get a better wet market in the same place. So, people would be willing to pay for resiliency. You just have to find the right, you can get the private sector involved. It's just finding that right source of capital to be able to make that resiliency happen. So, guys, we have to head back in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Samia or anybody, would you like to capture this? Or would you like me to do this? Any volunteers?
Please do it.
So I hope everybody get well through this virtual beaming process, because we will take a picture now. So please switch on your camera. Anna will take this picture. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see everyone. Great. So if you could just nice smile. Right. Fantastic. Okay, great. Oh, one more. Okay, more people, yay. All right. Okay, got it.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much.
So we are a little bit over the time. So every group leader has about maximum 5 minutes to share the results and findings from the group discussion with us. So let's start with the finding of the first group. Elizabeth, please go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Mario. We had a very broad topic, resilient infrastructure in Asia. So we were trying to surface both reactions and experiences from people around the proverbial table here. So things that came up was, not my quote, but a quote of others that has come before: never waste a good crisis, how there's heightened awareness around risk right now in this COVID-19 environment and preparedness. And so harnessing that as an opportunity to really highlight the interconnected nature of the kind of work that we do, looking at this broader systems thinking, and also the importance of advancing the evidence base. Oftentimes there's a lot of short-term focus on just getting the structure up and not thinking more broadly around some of these management and governance issues. So needing to balance the short term and the long term. We had some specific questions around the consistency of application of law, particularly around PPPs and securitization, which would be interesting to explore further, and examples in the region, as well as various policy instruments that have been successful within the ADB context or other context for advancing this kind of work. And then finally, the importance of linking the narrative around climate resilience to what we're talking about as well, and really using this as a broader platform to advance resilient infrastructure in Asia. So back over to you, Mario, and thanks to everybody who gave their thoughts in the group discussion.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for the time disciplinary and the excellent summary. So the next findings will be presented by Sanjay. Sanjay, I will hand over to you. Thank you. I think, Sanjay, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Mario, can you hear me?
Yes, excellent.
I'm
and
so,
see you.
And I apologize to everybody for the terrible connections I'm having today.
You're a great troubleshooter. You're a great troubleshooter. Thank you.
We actually had a pretty good discussion about how do you enable private sector investment in resilient infrastructure, and the conversation was at many levels. A lot of it focused on how do you get, what is the role of the public sector actually to make this happen. It started off with Kaushal from the transport sector in India talking about the need for a government commitment in terms of having consistency in policy so that they could move that forward. Tony from Arup actually joined in to talk about more as well as in terms of the private sector needing some comfort in terms of data, making sure that they have a good understanding of the data and the risks that are involved before they invest into a project. The issue of land value capture came up or air rights came up as Tony thought about, because there is a lot of uncertainty on the risk side. The private sector, of course, looks for more in terms of return to balance that. And so if there is, it's beneficial for us to have more data just to make things much more efficient as we move forward. The challenge of unquantifiable green benefits also came up. I mean, the same discussion that we had on not having enough data. And this is not related to any particular sector, but almost across all sectors. Even with COVID-19, as we start thinking about health and health-related benefits, or more improvement in social sectors, it's been very difficult for us to quantify the benefits going into this, to be able to say, here are the benefits, now how do we listen, how do we get that investment in? There was a discussion on the energy sector and where in some countries, the government has been giving up a lot in terms of guaranteeing the private sector, again, in terms of getting more investments in. The discussion also went from where Socorro pointed out that in Asia, from a safeguards perspective, in the Philippines, the government has been able to step back.
So I think we lost Sanjay. So sorry for that. So maybe we can go
Mario,
on.
if I may just add,
Yes.
what Sergio was saying, that I said that in the Philippines, there's not much government support on the resiliency of infrastructures. And then he finished by talking to us about the need for markets, resilient markets, and people are willing to pay for the cost of resiliency because of that need. And he ended by saying that the important thing in this resilient infrastructures is to be able to find the right source of capital.
Okay, thank you. I see, Sanjay, you are back again. Maybe you have to add one last sentence.
No. I think Samir or Socorro, I think, captured it pretty well.
Thanks, Samir, and also Sanjay, for you are the biggest troubleshooter. Thank you. So, Elisa, maybe you summarize the last findings of your group. Thank you.
I'll do a quick one. I'm conscious we've got a minute left and conscious of people's time. So we spoke about the role of PPPs as drivers of critical infrastructure resilience, and the context was investors interviewed in the Australian context and enablers around the appropriate risk transfer and also having experienced governance partners. So in the discussion, it was quite interesting, the different regions, obviously, and the complexities around risk ownership and how that can impact what kind of procurement you have. So examples of kind of that risk ownership being so complex that it then falls into straightforward financing, or because of the costs of the PPP, it falls into the straightforward financing, and also that dialogue with government and how that sits and what role DB, I'm getting my acronyms mixed up, getting late, can play in, providing a little bit of a bit of security there as well. And then one final one, also the challenge around how can you actually get the appetite and the quality, particularly given the whole of life costs that are required to underpin resilience through the project life cycle.
Thank you, Elise.
You've gone on to mute.
Yeah, the moderator should be not on mute. So many thanks to all of you, the panel, Elisa, Elizabeth, and also Sanjay for the excellent and very great job, but also the organizing team for making this session possible. So I will try to summarize it a little bit. Stimulating private sector investments in resilient infrastructure is also an important issue for ADB. Even in difficult times like this, investing in resilient infrastructure is more important than ever. And the ADB strategy 2030 is dealing with both the resilient infrastructure and also stimulating private sector investments to achieve prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asia and the Pacific. So I hope you have enjoyed this virtual brown bag session and have experienced some takeaways for you. So maybe after all these virtual sessions during this year, maybe we should also offer a virtual session on how to socialize with people in real life. I think we already lost this a little bit. So stay safe, have a good start in this very special time of the year. Thank you to everybody, and bye-bye.
Hi everyone, thanks Mario.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mario.
Just a quick reminder perhaps is that I've sent this to the chat, and it's that we will be sending you a feedback form in your emails. It would be great if you could share your thoughts and comments on that so we can improve our sessions in the future. So thank you so much for your time as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.